Have you ever had that gnawing feeling that someone wasn't being completely honest with you? That behind their carefully chosen words and practiced smile lurked intentions they would never willingly reveal? Perhaps it was a colleague who praised your work while quietly undermining you, a partner whose explanations never quite added up, a friend whose supportive words somehow left you feeling more alone than before. You've tried direct questioning, you've analysed texts, emails, and conversations looking for inconsistencies, you've sought advice from others. But still, the truth remains elusive, hidden behind the masks people wear when they know they're being watched. But what if I told you there exists a psychological technique so powerful that it can make others unconsciously reveal their true intentions without them even realising what they're exposing? A method that doesn't require mind reading or manipulation, but instead uses a fundamental principle of human psychology that Carl Jung discovered over a century ago. This isn't about tricking people or playing mind games. It's about creating a psychological mirror that reflects back the unconscious patterns that people cannot help but display when they believe no one is looking for them. This video is for those who are tired of being manipulated, deceived, or kept in the dark. For those who sense that understanding others' true intentions would transform their relationships, their career, and their ability to navigate this increasingly complex social world. Today I'm going to reveal Jung's mirror technique, a method so subtle yet profound that once you understand it, you'll never interact with others the same way again. And by the end of this video, you'll possess an ability that few even know exists: the power to see through social masks and understand what others truly want from you, without ever having to directly ask them. In this video, I'll explain the psychological foundation of Jung's mirror technique, the 3 critical environments where you must apply it, and the specific steps to implement it in any interaction. I'll also reveal the common mistakes that prevent most people from accurately reading others and how to avoid these pitfalls. Carl Jung, one of the founders of analytical psychology, never actually called this method the mirror technique. This is a term that developed later to describe a pattern of interaction he identified in his clinical work. What Jung discovered was that the unconscious mind communicates in ways that the conscious mind cannot control, and that with the right approach, these unconscious signals become clearly visible. I've spent years studying not only Jung's original writings, but also how his principles have been applied in modern contexts, from business negotiations to intelligence gathering to therapeutic settings. I've tested these methods in my own interactions and documented the results across hundreds of different scenarios. But this isn't just theoretical knowledge. By the end of this video, you'll have a practical framework that you can immediately apply in your own life.
Come here.
You'll learn how to create situations where others naturally reveal their true intentions, without the defensiveness that direct questioning often triggers. Before we begin, I need to emphasize something important. This technique isn't about manipulation or gaining unfair advantage. It's about removing the barriers to authentic communication. Because when you truly understand someone's intentions, you can respond to what they actually need rather than what they pretend to want. And that creates the foundation for genuine connection rather than strategic gamesmanship. Now, let's explore why most people remain blind to others' true intentions and how Jung's insights can change that forever. Imagine you're looking into a mirror. You see your own reflection staring back. But what if that mirror could show not just your physical appearance, but the hidden aspects of your psyche, your unacknowledged fears, desires, and intentions? According to Jung, this is precisely what happens in human interaction. We don't see others as they objectively are. Instead, we see our own unconscious projected onto them, and they in turn project their unconscious onto us. Jung called this phenomenon projection, and he considered it one of the primary mechanisms by which the unconscious mind communicates with the external world. In his words, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's where it gets interesting, and where the mirror technique begins. Jung discovered that these projections aren't random. They follow patterns that, once understood, become predictable and readable. Think about the last time you intensely disliked someone upon meeting them. Was it really them you disliked? Or was it something they reflected back to you about yourself that you were unwilling to acknowledge? A study from the University of California found that the traits we most strongly react to in others are precisely the traits we deny or repress in ourselves. This isn't just psychological theory, it's measurable human behaviour. And the inverse is also true. What we admire in others often reflects qualities we value but haven't fully developed in ourselves. Our attractions and repulsions are maps of our own psyche. But what does this have to do with uncovering others' true intentions? Everything. Because while we're busy projecting onto others, they're simultaneously projecting onto us. And those projections contain the very information we're seeking about their true motives and intentions. Let me give you a concrete example. A colleague consistently accuses you of not sharing information with the team. They make comments about transparency and teamwork, yet you know you've been diligent about communicating. What's really happening? In many cases, the person making this accusation is the one withholding information. Their unconscious guilt manifests as an accusation against you. They see in you what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. This is the projection paradox. People will tell you their true intentions not through what they claim about themselves, but through what they consistently project onto you and others. A fascinating study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology demonstrated this effect with remarkable clarity. Researchers found that individuals who were asked to cheat on a test were significantly more likely to suspect others of cheating, even when no evidence existed. Their own behaviour created a lens through which they viewed everyone else. This is why direct questioning rarely reveals true intentions. When you ask someone directly about their motives, you activate their conscious mind, the very part of them designed to maintain their social mask. But when you create conditions that activate projection, their unconscious speaks freely. But here's the critical insight that Jung discovered, and that forms the foundation of the mirror technique. You can deliberately position yourself as a blank screen for others' projections. By doing so, you create conditions where others cannot help but reveal their unconscious patterns. In psychological terms, you're creating what Jung called a container for the other person's projections. And within that container, their true intentions become visible not through what they say, but through what they unconsciously reveal. This isn't just theory. Intelligence agencies worldwide have used variations of this technique for decades. The most successful interrogators don't ask direct questions. They create psychological environments where subjects reveal information without realizing they're doing so. But how do you position yourself as this blank screen? How do you create conditions where others' projections become not just visible but unmistakable? That brings us to the second part of the mirror technique. To understand how to create a psychological mirror that reveals others' true intentions, we first need to understand what prevents us from seeing clearly in the first place. The primary obstacle is our own psychological noise, our assumptions, expectations, hopes, fears, and biases. This noise acts as a filter, distorting what we see and hear. Before you can clearly perceive others' projections, you must first quiet this inner static. Jung described this process as developing the observer, the part of your consciousness that can step back and witness interactions without immediately being swept up in emotional reactions. Here are the 5 steps to creating the psychological mirror. First, practice conscious neutrality. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat or disengaged. Rather, it means maintaining an inner neutrality even while outwardly responding appropriately to the interaction. You're creating an internal space of observation that remains separate from your external participation. When speaking with someone whose intentions you want to understand, notice your own emotional reactions, but don't act from them immediately. Instead, maintain what Buddhists call beginner's mind, a state of openness and lack of preconceptions. This neutrality creates the first surface of your psychological mirror. Without it, you'll simply see your own reactions reflected back at you, not the other person's true intentions. Former FBI negotiator Chris Voss calls this tactical empathy, the ability to understand another's perspective while maintaining emotional distance. In his book, Never Split the Difference, he describes how this approach allows negotiators to perceive subtle cues that would otherwise be missed in the emotional noise of high-stakes situations. Second, employ controlled ambiguity. Jung noticed that when people encounter ambiguity, they automatically fill that space with projections. This is a fundamental psychological mechanism. Humans are meaning-making machines. We cannot tolerate emptiness or uncertainty, so we fill it with content from our unconscious. In practice, this means occasionally using statements and questions that contain deliberate space for interpretation, not to confuse or manipulate, but to create a canvas on which the other person can paint their unconscious concerns. For example, instead of asking, "Do you think I did a good job on the presentation?" which invites a conscious, filtered response, you might say, "I'm curious about your thoughts on the presentation." This ambiguity creates space for them to project what's actually on their mind rather than responding to your specific concern. A study conducted at Harvard Business School found that negotiators who use controlled ambiguity in their communication elicited 37% more information from counterparts than those who used direct questioning. The ambiguity created psychological space that the other party unwittingly filled with revealing information. Third, master the strategic pause. Silence is perhaps the most powerful element of the psychological mirror. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with silence and will rush to fill it, often with whatever is truly on their mind rather than a carefully constructed response. Jung observed this in his therapeutic practice. When he would remain silent after a patient's statement, the patient would often continue with significantly more revealing information than what they had initially shared. In your conversations, practice allowing 3 to 5 seconds of silence after the other person finishes speaking. This is longer than is socially comfortable, but not so long that it feels deliberately awkward. These few seconds of space often lead people to elaborate, qualify, or completely redirect their previous statement, frequently in ways that reveal their true thoughts. Former CIA officer Philip Houston documented this technique in his fieldwork, noting that strategic silence was often more effective at eliciting truthful information than any form of questioning, no matter how cleverly crafted. Fourth, reflect without judgment. When someone shares information, practice reflecting their statements back to them without adding interpretation or judgment. This is different from simply repeating their words. Instead, you're capturing the essence of what they've said and presenting it back to them as a neutral observation. For example, if someone says, "I don't think James is the right fit for this project," you might respond with, "You have concerns about James's fit with the project." This reflection accomplishes two things simultaneously. It shows the person you're listening, and it creates another opportunity for them to elaborate on what they really mean. What happens next is crucial. People will often respond to this reflection with, "No, it's not that exactly, it's more that," and then reveal a deeper, more authentic concern that they didn't express initially. This technique comes directly from Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy approach, which Jung heavily influenced. Rogers found that neutral reflection was one of the most powerful tools for helping people access their true thoughts and feelings. Fifth, observe the incongruence. Jung was particularly interested in what he called tells, moments when a person's words, tone, and body language don't align. These incongruences are often the most reliable indicators of hidden intentions. When you notice misalignment between what someone is saying and how they're saying it, you've identified a point of psychological tension. This tension almost always indicates an area where their conscious presentation differs from their unconscious reality. For instance, someone might say they're totally fine with a decision while their facial expression momentarily reveals contempt, or their body becomes rigid. Or they might verbally support your idea while subtly shaking their head no. Dr. Paul Ekman, a pioneer in the study of facial expressions, found that these micro-expressions last for just 1/15th to 1/25th of a second, but reveal genuine emotions that contradict verbal statements. His research, building on Jungian principles, has been applied in settings ranging from counter-terrorism to corporate negotiations. By implementing these 5 practices, conscious neutrality, controlled ambiguity, strategic pause, non-judgmental reflection, and observation of incongruence, you create a psychological environment where others' projections become visible. You've constructed the mirror that will reflect back their true intentions. But there's a critical element we haven't yet addressed. How do you interpret what you see in this mirror? How do you distinguish between meaningful projections and random noise? That brings us to the third part of the technique. Jung believed that the unconscious mind communicates through patterns, not isolated incidents. A single projection might be meaningless, but a repeated pattern of projections reveals consistent underlying intentions. This is where most people fail in reading others. They focus on individual statements or actions rather than looking for the recurring patterns that reveal deeper truths. Here's how to accurately read the patterns that emerge in your psychological mirror. First, track emotional triggers. Pay close attention to what consistently triggers emotional reactions in the other person. These triggers are almost always connected to their true concerns and intentions. For example, if someone becomes disproportionately animated whenever the topic of recognition comes up, it suggests that recognition, or its lack, is a significant unconscious driver for them. Their stated intentions might involve teamwork and collaboration, but their emotional triggers reveal a deeper concern with individual acknowledgement. Jung called these emotional flashpoints complexes, clusters of emotionally charged memories and associations that create pronounced reactions when activated. By mapping someone's complexes, you can understand what truly motivates them beneath their conscious awareness. A landmark study by Antonio Damasio, a neuroscientist at the University of Southern California, confirmed Jung's theory. Damasio found that emotional reactions precede conscious thought and significantly influence decision-making in ways people rarely recognize. These somatic markers reveal true intentions more reliably than stated preferences or logical reasoning. Second, identify recurring themes. Listen for the stories, examples and metaphors that someone repeatedly uses. These aren't random. They reveal core preoccupations that often connect directly to hidden intentions. If a colleague frequently brings up stories about others taking credit for work, even in different contexts, this reveals an underlying concern about recognition and ownership that may not align with their stated collaborative intentions. Jung called these recurring narratives personal myths, stories we tell ourselves and others that contain symbolic representations of our deepest concerns. By identifying these myths, you gain insight into the person's unconscious motivational structure. Third, notice what they attribute to others. Pay particular attention to the qualities, motivations, and intentions that someone regularly attributes to others, especially when these attributions are negative or critical. Jung observed that these attributions are often projections of disowned aspects of the self. The qualities someone most vehemently identifies in others are frequently the very qualities they deny or repress in themselves. If someone consistently accuses others of being manipulative, competitive, or dishonest, there's a significant probability that these qualities reflect their own disowned tendencies, and by extension, their true intentions. A Harvard study by psychologist Daniel Gilbert confirmed this projection mechanism. Gilbert found that when people attribute intentions to others, they rely heavily on simulation, imagining what they themselves would intend in a similar situation. This self-reference creates a projection effect where our assessment of others' intentions actually reveals our own. Fourth, map contradiction patterns. When someone's words and actions repeatedly contradict each other, the pattern of these contradictions reveals their true priorities. For instance, someone might verbalize commitment to work-life balance, while consistently rewarding those who work longest, or they might emphasize transparency while withholding key information. These contradiction patterns reveal which of the conflicting values truly guides their behavior. Jung referred to this as the distinction between the persona, the face we present to the world, and the shadow, the disowned aspects of ourselves that nevertheless influence our behavior. The contradiction pattern shows where persona and shadow diverge. Fifth, analyze avoidance patterns. What someone consistently avoids can be as revealing as what they actively pursue. Avoidance patterns often indicate boundaries around threatening psychological material, topics that would expose intentions they prefer to keep hidden. If a team leader consistently avoids discussions about resource allocation or recognition, despite these being relevant to the work, it likely indicates an area where their stated intentions differ from their actual priorities or concerns. By tracking these 5 pattern types, emotional triggers, recurring themes, attributions to others, contradictions and avoidances, you transform isolated observations into a coherent map of someone's true intentions. This pattern recognition approach aligns with how intelligence analysts are trained to evaluate information. Rather than focusing on any single data point, they look for consistent patterns that emerge across multiple observations. These patterns reveal more reliable intelligence than even the most seemingly significant isolated incident. But understanding these patterns is only half the equation. The final piece of the mirror technique involves using this understanding strategically, without manipulating or exploiting others. Now that you can see the patterns that reveal others' true intentions, how do you use this insight effectively and ethically? Jung believed that understanding others' unconscious motivations created an obligation, not to manipulate them, but to engage with them more authentically. The goal isn't to gain power over others, but to reduce the distortions that prevent genuine connection. Here are the 4 ways to apply the insights you gain from the mirror technique. First, respond to the underlying intention, not just the stated request. When you discern someone's true intention, you can address their actual need, rather than simply reacting to their surface-level communication. This creates more satisfying interactions for both parties. For example, if you recognise that a colleague's critical feedback about your project is actually driven by their anxiety about being left out of important decisions, you might respond by involving them more directly in the process, rather than just defending your work. In psychological terms, you're addressing what Jung called the need behind the need, the underlying motivation that drives surface behaviour. By responding to this deeper level, you create the experience of being truly understood, which dramatically changes the dynamic of the interaction. Second, create conditions for conscious awareness. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is help others become aware of intentions they haven't fully acknowledged to themselves. Jung called this process integration, bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness where it can be addressed directly. This doesn't mean confronting someone with an interpretation of their behaviour. Instead, it means creating conditions where they can safely recognise their own patterns. For instance, if you notice that a friend consistently undermines relationships that start to become serious, you might share an observation like, "I've noticed you seem most critical of partners when things start getting more committed. I wonder what that period of a relationship brings up for you." This gentle reflection creates an opportunity for self-discovery without imposing your interpretation. The key is phrasing that invites exploration rather than suggesting you already know the answer. Third, adjust your communication to address unspoken concerns. When you understand someone's true intentions and concerns, you can proactively address these in your communication, even if they haven't explicitly raised them. If you recognise that a client's hesitation about a proposal stems from fear of looking foolish if the project fails, rather than their stated concerns about budget, you might emphasise the safety mechanisms and contingency plans built into your approach. This addresses their actual concern without requiring them to explicitly voice it. Jung observed that much of human communication happens at this implicit level. By acknowledging unspoken concerns, you create a sense of psychological safety that allows for more honest and productive interaction. Fourth, set appropriate boundaries based on aligned understanding. Perhaps most importantly, understanding others' true intentions allows you to set boundaries that protect your interest while respecting theirs. This isn't about defence or opposition, it's about creating containers for interaction that serve everyone's authentic needs. For example, if you recognise that a business partner's true intention is to gain your expertise while minimising your compensation, you can establish clear boundaries around knowledge sharing and collaborative structure. These boundaries aren't punitive, they simply align the relationship with a more accurate understanding of the dynamics at play. Jung called this psychological hygiene, the practice of maintaining appropriate boundaries that honour both your needs and the other person's without pretense or unnecessary conflict. These four applications, responding to underlying intentions, creating conditions for awareness, adjusting communication, and setting aligned boundaries, transform your understanding from passive knowledge into active wisdom. But there's an essential caveat that Jung emphasised repeatedly in his work. The mirror technique reveals patterns and probabilities, not certainties. Even the most consistent pattern of projections can be misinterpreted or might reflect temporary states rather than enduring intentions. This is why Jung advocated what he called the principle of uncertainty, maintaining humility about our interpretations of others' inner worlds. Use the patterns you observe as working hypotheses that guide your approach, not as definitive judgments about who someone is or what they ultimately intend. This humility doesn't diminish the technique's power. On the contrary, it enhances it by keeping you open to new information and preventing the arrogance that leads to misreading subtle cues. If this approach resonates with you, write, "I choose awareness" in the comments. Let's see how many people are ready to look beyond the surface and engage with the deeper currents of human intention. And stay tuned for my next video, where I'll explore the shadow integration method. Jung's approach to working with the disowned aspects of yourself that sabotage your goals and relationships without your awareness. Understanding others begins with understanding yourself, and that video will show you how.